Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst into the world of Victorian parenting. A place so strange, so strict, and so suspiciously sticky that most of what went on would get you a locked up or a few sternly worded visits from Child Protective Services. If you've ever wondered what it was like to raise children in a time when teething was treated with whiskey and discipline sometimes involved a family-size wooden spoon, this one's for you. Before you get too comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this. Drop a comment to tell me where you're listening from, and if your childhood ever involved cod liver oil, a cold sponge bath, or a distant relative who swore by leeches. I read them all, mostly because I can't sleep either. Now, dim those lights, put on a fan for that soft, soothing background noise, and settle in. Maybe bundle up with a blanket. Victorian parents would probably have insisted on 3 layers, regardless of the season, just in case of a chill. But let's pause for a second. Did Victorian moms really put their babies in cages outside their apartment windows? What did kids eat, and why was it often grey? Was children should be seen and not heard a literal law? How many accidental deaths involved household poisons before anyone invented a child-proof cap? And why was go play with the arsenic not immediately followed by, no, seriously, don't? Congratulations, you've just woken up in the year 1885, somewhere in the heart of Victorian London. You're 8 years old, your nanny has a moustache, and your mother is dosing you with something called soothing syrup. Good luck. Step inside the Victorian nursery, a room stuffed with more rules, ruffles, and rattles than toys. The wallpaper peels in pink and green, and every surface is slightly sticky with an unidentified substance that could be porridge, or possibly the family cat. The air smells faintly of boiled milk, old dolls, and the kind of disinfectant that probably causes more harm than good. It's early morning, and the sun struggles to pierce the thick curtains trimmed with a level of lace usually reserved for wedding cakes. You're barely awake, and already you're being appraised. First by your nanny, then by a parade of elderly relatives who visit mostly to critique your posture and offer unsolicited advice about rickets. The floor is a mosaic of alphabet blocks, marbles, and the odd crust of dry bread, a health hazard only slightly less risky than the actual medicine cabinet. You shiver, not just from the draft, but from the knowledge that your every move is governed by an unspoken list of Victorian nursery laws. Number 1. Never walk, always tiptoe. Number 2. Toys are for admiring, not for touching, unless you're demonstrating the proper way to hold a wooden hoop, in which case you must display a level of reverence usually reserved for holy relics. Number 3. All dolls must remain fully clothed at all times, or risk being reported to the moral authorities, aka your aunt. The room's play area is a loosely defined rectangle demarcated by a fading rug, a broken abacus, and what may have once been a rocking horse, now with 1 eye and 3 legs. Here, you are expected to play quietly and creatively, which really means you should never laugh, jump, or invent games that involve running, mess, or, heaven forbid, imagination. At any moment, a grown-up might appear in the doorway to remind you that idle hands are the devil's workshop. So you quickly pretend to be embroidering something useful, like a handkerchief you secretly intend to bury in the yard later. At the centre of the nursery stands the great monument to Victorian childhood, the nurse's chair. It's not for sitting. It's for observation, interrogation, and, occasionally, napping upright while balancing a tray of cod liver oil and a hairbrush. Nanny herself is the general of this miniature garrison, armed with an encyclopedic knowledge of manners, a mysterious drawer full of soothing syrups, and the uncanny ability to sense fun from 3 rooms away. Let's talk about your toys. You might have a single, wooden soldier with a missing arm, or a doll with porcelain cheeks, glass eyes, and a haunting stare that has definitely witnessed crimes. If you're lucky, your toys are kept in a locked cabinet, ostensibly for your safety, but more likely to prevent you from getting actual joy out of them. Once a week, you're allowed to take out the Noah's Ark set, but only if you solemnly promise not to drown the camels again. The nursery's window looks out onto the garden, where you occasionally spot other children being marched about in formation, supervised by adults wielding umbrellas like sabres. You long to join them, but first, you must endure your lessons, reciting moral poetry, practicing neat handwriting, and learning the correct way to curtsy or bow to imaginary royalty. Sometimes, if you're really well behaved, you're permitted to watch the street from the safety of your window cage, breathing in that crisp, sooty London air as you dangle 2 stories above the neighbour's laundry. The Victorian nursery is less a room and more a crucible, a place where every comfort comes with a side of danger, every treat is a test, and every cuddle comes with a lecture about building character. It's not so much a childhood as a decades-long audition for the position of small, well-behaved adult. But if you play your cards right, you just might make it to supper without being accused of moral decay or mysterious stickiness. And that, in the Victorian world, is the definition of a successful day. It's breakfast time, which means gruel. Every morning, you're greeted with a pale, lumpy substance that Victorian mothers claim is healthful but mostly seems designed to crush your spirit before you even reach the schoolroom. Sugar is rare, flavour is forbidden, and if you're very lucky, you'll find a rogue raisin unless it's a dead fly. The table is set with military precision. Heavy curtains keep the sunlight out. God forbid a single beam illuminate the culinary tragedy that is your breakfast. You shuffle to your seat, hands scrubbed raw from yesterday's character-building cold water wash, and stare down at your bowl. It stares back, thick and sullen. If hope had a texture, Victorian gruel would be its exact opposite. Across from you, siblings sit in silence, each privately negotiating with the porridge. There's no idle chatter. Victorian breakfast is not for bonding, it's for fortitude. Conversation is permitted only in Latin, or if you're correcting someone's table manners. The silence is occasionally broken by the distant thunk of your father folding a newspaper, or the wheeze of the family dog, who has wisely given up on begging for table scraps. You take your first bite. It tastes like wet cardboard and Monday mornings. The gruel is slightly grey, occasionally lumpy, and sometimes alarmingly translucent. If you ask what's in it, the answer is always goodness, which you come to understand is code for whatever was left in the pantry. You chew dutifully, teeth squeaking over the occasional grain of sand, left over from the previous day's bread, which doubled as a building material for the extension your uncle is always promising to finish. Butter? Jam? Anything approaching joy? Don't even ask. Butter is for guests. Jam is locked in a cupboard, doled out by the teaspoon only if you survive scarlet fever. Sugar, if you're not an aristocrat, is basically a fairy tale ingredient, spoken of in hushed tones, and only spotted at Christmas, floating on a distant pudding like a mirage. On special days, birthdays, Queen Victoria's Jubilee, or that one time the coal man smiled at your mother, there might be an extra scoop of oats, or the ceremonial division of a single, bruised apple among 5 children. Otherwise, the only real variety is the consistency. Some days it's so thin you could drink it, others so solid it could be used as mortar. Either way, you eat it. Victorian parents are full of advice about the moral benefits of a Spartan breakfast. It builds character, they say, handing you a spoon that doubles as a disciplinary tool. It cleanses the humours. Never mind that your humours are mainly in need of cinnamon and perhaps some milk. The adults read aloud dire warnings about the dangers of French toast and fancy foods, as if an unguarded croissant might sneak in and corrupt the youth. Sometimes you'll see advertisements in the penny papers for breakfast powders that promise robust health, glowing skin, and relief from persistent vapours. You beg for a tin, but your mother is unmoved. She reminds you that the family's secret to longevity is simple fare and daily discomfort. You start to suspect your ancestors lived this long out of pure stubbornness. After the ordeal, you're sent off to school or the nursery, fortified only in the sense that your expectations for the rest of the day can't possibly get any lower. If you manage to sneak a crust of last night's bread or a stolen lump of cheese from the pantry, you're living large, Just don't let your nanny catch you, or you'll face a lecture on gluttony and the evils of between-meal snacking. By the time breakfast ends, you are clean, disciplined, slightly malnourished, and prepared for a day of memorizing moral tales and fighting off fainting spells before noon. In the Victorian household, breakfast is not the most important meal of the day. It's simply the first hurdle in a long, character-building obstacle course called childhood. And if you make it to lunch, well, that's another miracle. Victorian childhood is about mastering invisibility. The house echoes with the warning, children should be seen and not heard. Your job is to blend in with the furniture, avoid squeaking floorboards, and pray nobody asks you a direct question at dinner. One poorly timed giggle and you're exiled to solitary confinement with nothing but moral poetry for company. It's a delicate art, this dance of silence. You move through the house like a very small, slightly nervous ghost. Every step is calculated. Walk only on the runner, never the loose board, and for heaven's sake, never trip over the footstool. If you must sneeze, do it into your pinafore, quietly and with an apologetic expression. Coughs are to be stifled, hiccups forbidden, and if you drop something, you'd best develop time travel to fix it before the adults notice. The drawing room is a minefield. You're technically allowed in, but only if you remain absolutely still and radiate the energy of a potted plant. You sit, hands folded, eyes politely downcast, and try not to look at the biscuits on the sideboard, which are as forbidden as laughter and twice as tempting. There's a particular way to hold yourself, straight-backed, knees together, not a single toe poking out from your boots. If you fidget, Aunt Prudence will notice, and nothing ruins a Tuesday faster than Aunt Prudence's disappointed sigh. Dinner is the final exam of the day. The adults converse about the Crimean War, church attendance, or the price of suet. You, meanwhile, must eat silently, chew thoroughly, and avoid the siren call of the gravy boat. If spoken to, your answer must be concise, respectful, and ideally expressed in full sentences. Yes, father. No, mother. I'm terribly sorry, grandmamma. I will never again mention frogs at table. If you make a joke, it should reference Greek mythology, or at least involve a gentle pun about sherry. Otherwise, silence. Being ignored is considered a privilege. The fewer words you say, the safer you are. You become adept at the neutral face, that expression that says, I am content, I am grateful, and I am definitely not thinking about hiding under the piano. You learn to control your laughter, to suppress the urge to ask why Cousin Edgar's hair looks like a frightened hedgehog, and to stifle the impulse to sing, shout, or otherwise express joy. Joy, you see, is to be reserved for Queen Victoria's birthday, and the occasional sighting of a hedgehog in the garden. There are, of course, exceptions. If an adult wishes to show off your memorization skills, you may be called upon to recite moral poetry or list the kings and queens of England backward. This is less an honour and more a test. Fail to remember the last line of the village blacksmith, and you'll be sent back to the nursery with extra handwriting drills and a stern reminder about the virtues of silence. Punishment for breaking the code of silence is swift and creative. There's the reflection chair, where you must sit and contemplate your sins while staring at a print of a weeping angel. There's solitary reading, which is reading but with the emphasis on books with titles like Why Talking Leads to Ruin. And of course there's the ever-dreaded no supper, which means going to bed hungry while pondering the acoustics of your own regret. But perhaps the most Victorian punishment of all is the lecture. An adult, often your father, but sometimes a passing neighbour, will explain at great length why silence builds character, why noisy children end up in debtor's prison, and why expressing an opinion is dangerously French. You will nod, apologise, and resolve to train your voice to a whisper for the next week. As the candlelight flickers and the clock chimes 8, you tiptoe upstairs, past the creaking steps, back into the safety of the nursery. Here, you can finally exhale, perhaps whisper a joke to your teddy bear, and celebrate another day survived without accidentally being heard. In Victorian England, invisibility isn't just a talent, it's the only guaranteed survival skill. Your nanny is the true ruler of the nursery, a steely-eyed woman in starched black who can silence a tantrum with a single look. She's part therapist, part drill sergeant, and possibly part crow. Her medicine chest contains enough laudanum and soothing syrups to stun an elephant, and she's not afraid to use them liberally. From the moment you open your eyes, you're on her timetable. There's no such thing as a lazy morning when Nanny's in charge. She's up before the cockerel, hair tightly pinned, apron crisp enough to slice bread, keys jangling from her belt like warning bells. The first sound you hear is her purposeful stride across the floorboards, a sound that strikes dread into the hearts of children and dust bunnies alike. You try to hide under the covers, but she knows every trick, every hiding spot, and every lump that isn't a pillow. Resistance is not only futile, it's actively discouraged. Nanny has the sort of stare that could freeze milk at 20 paces. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. If you so much as sniffle in a way she deems unproductive, she will fix you with those dark, owlish eyes, and suddenly you're confessing to crimes you haven't even committed yet. The stories about her are legendary. She once single-handedly separated two fighting twins with nothing but a frown, and rumour has it she once made the neighbour's dog apologise for barking during nap time. There's an ironclad schedule in the nursery, and Nanny keeps it with military precision. Breakfast at 7, lessons at 8, a brisk walk at 9, rain, shine, or meteor shower. Then back for handwriting, recitations, and constructive play. Every activity is designed to build moral fibre, which apparently can be manufactured from cold oatmeal and repetitive prayer. If you ever find yourself with a spare minute, don't celebrate. She will hand you a dust rag and instruct you on the virtues of cheerful industry. And then there's the medicine chest. It's a Victorian Pandora's box, full of bottles, powders, and unidentifiable tonics with labels like soothing elixir, cordial of calm, and essence of nettle and briskness. Got a toothache? Laudanum. Can't sleep? Soothing syrup. Cough? Try this dark, mysterious draught that tastes like despair and old shoes. The side effects range from drowsiness to a brief, exhilarating glimpse of the afterlife. You quickly learn to fake robust health rather than risk another spoonful. Despite her severity, there are moments when Nanny almost passes for human. On rare afternoons, if you complete your recitations without error, she might read you a story, usually something cautionary, where the protagonist is punished for untidy shoes or a surfeit of enthusiasm. Sometimes, if the wind is right and the household is calm, she'll let you play with the special toys, a battered set of building blocks or a puzzle missing half its pieces. If you ever glimpse a twinkle in her eye, it's likely a trick of the gaslight, but you can always hope. Of course, Nanny is a master of discipline. She believes in the restorative powers of cod liver oil, the moral uplift of regular bedtimes, and the complete eradication of idle hands. Her punishments are rarely physical, oh no, they're psychological masterpieces. A stern lecture on the fate of unruly children, a pointed glance at the family Bible, or the dreaded silent treatment, during which the temperature in the nursery drops by at least 10 degrees. And don't forget, Nanny knows everything. She sees all, hears all, and remembers every misdeed. Lost a button? She knows. Hid your greens under the cushion? She knows. Whispered about her moustache? She absolutely knows, and will remind you of it when you least expect it, usually during a family gathering. In the end, you can't help but develop a complicated affection for your Victorian nanny. She's your jailer, your drill sergeant, your part-time storyteller, and, if you're very lucky, your fiercest protector. You'll spend your childhood tiptoeing around her, but one day, when you're grown and taste freedom, you'll realize you know how to fold hospital corners, recite Tennyson, and survive on 6 hours of sleep, all because of her. In Victorian England, that's not just childcare. That's preparation for anything life, or history, can throw at you. Time for a bath, once a week, whether you need it or not. You're hauled to a tin tub in the kitchen, scrubbed with carbolic soap, and reminded to be grateful you're not being rinsed off with vinegar. Cold water builds character, and so do the mysterious rashes you develop after. Bath night arrives with the grim sense of ceremony usually reserved for minor surgery. The house fills with the clatter of kettles, the sizzle of water meeting metal, and the distant sound of someone desperately trying to light the fire with a single, slightly damp match. You're summoned to the kitchen, where the tub sits like a gleaming threat, radiating an aura of cold, steely promise. Your siblings eye each other warily, each hoping not to be first in line, too chilly, or last, too, well, chunky. If you're lucky, you go first and get the hottest, cleanest water. If you're less fortunate, you're plunged into what is essentially a family soup, cloudy, suspiciously grey, with the odd floater that may once have been a button or, more likely, a crumb from last Sunday's suet pudding. Victorian efficiency means the whole household shares the same bathwater. Conservation is the law of the land, and also a brilliant excuse for why you still smell faintly of turnips on Thursday. Nanny or mother presides, sleeves rolled, soap at the ready. Carbolic soap, the pride of modern chemistry, is presented as a luxury but feels more like sandpaper dipped in pine needles. It leaves you red, raw, and questionably sanitized. Rinse is done with a jug of lukewarm water, poured slowly as if it might run out if used too quickly. Hair washing is reserved for special occasions, coronations, outbreaks of lice, or the occasional royal visit. Otherwise, your scalp is brushed vigorously to stimulate the roots, which in practice means to spread the itch evenly. If you complain, you're met with stories of Great Aunt Bessie, who only bathed once a year and lived to be 93, possibly out of spite. You're also reminded that, before the wonders of modern soap, people scrubbed themselves with vinegar, sand, or nothing at all. So a weekly bath in actual water is the height of luxury, and grumbling is, frankly, ungrateful. Towels are thin, scratchy, and always slightly damp no matter how long they hang by the stove. You're rubbed down briskly, left pink and shivering, then bundled into a fresh nightshirt, fresh by Victorian standards, meaning it's only seen 3 previous owners and hasn't yet become self-aware. Your hair, if long, is plaited tightly, both for neatness and as a medieval security measure against wandering vermin. Bath time is not complete without a ritual inspection for rashes, scratches, and suspicious marks. Any spots are treated with ointments from the family medicine chest, mysterious substances that smell faintly of tar and have names like Dr. Clabber's Universal Salve. Cuts are dabbed with iodine or, for extra drama, neat gin. You're then sent to bed, body tingling, pores burning, hair smelling faintly of whatever flowers were cheapest that week at the market. Of course, the bath does not guarantee cleanliness. By morning, you've already managed to find a mud puddle or mysterious stain, but no one seems concerned. The prevailing wisdom is that a thin layer of dirt protects against illness, and anyone seen scrubbing themselves outside of bath night is regarded with deep suspicion, possibly French, probably eccentric. There are upsides, though. A weekly bath is a rare chance to eavesdrop on grown-up gossip, listen to the creak and groan of the old pipes, and make boats out of crusts of bread. Quickly forbidden. You emerge from the ordeal cleaner than before, vaguely traumatized, but with another badge of Victorian childhood: survival. If you're ever tempted to complain about your morning shower or sigh over a slightly chilly bathroom, remember this: you could be waiting your turn for a lukewarm rinse in water flavored by every member of your family, grateful just to escape with most of your skin intact. In the world of Victorian hygiene, you don't strive for sparkling, you aim for mostly presentable, and that's a win. The playroom is both a paradise and a minefield. You might get a top, a hoop, or a doll with eyes that follow you everywhere. Most toys are wooden, breakable, and entirely unsafe, designed to prepare you for life's hardships, or, more likely, tetanus. You enter the room with a mixture of excitement and dread, eyeing the toy chest with the same suspicion you'd reserve for an unfamiliar pudding at supper. Victorian playthings are marvels of craftsmanship and menace. The jack-in-the-box is wound with trembling hands, knowing full well that what pops out isn't a cheerful clown but the stuff of lifelong trust issues. The rocking horse, paint flaking, one ear missing, sits ominously in the corner, daring you to mount up and risk a splinter in places you'd rather not discuss. Toys in this era are engineered with a philosophy best described as builds character, may cause minor injuries. Wooden blocks double as both architectural tools and impromptu projectiles in sibling warfare. Marbles are beautiful, shiny, and the number one reason everyone over the age of 6 has a chipped tooth or a suspicious limp. Doll houses are elaborate. Miniature mansions, complete with tiny furniture and even tinier hazards, like pins disguised as fire pokers. If you're lucky enough to have a mechanical toy, don't get attached. The gears will jam by tea time, and fixing it requires the skills of a Swiss watchmaker or, failing that, a child with no regard for personal safety. And then there are the dolls. Victorian dolls are not cute. They are Gothic masterpieces with porcelain faces, glass eyes, and an expression that says, "I know your secrets." Some even have real human hair, which raises more questions than it answers. If you make the mistake of sleeping with one too close to your bed, prepare to wake up convinced you've angered a restless spirit. The rules of the playroom are unwritten but strictly enforced. You may play, but you may not make a mess. At least not a visible one. Games must be educational, or at least pretend to be. Blind man's bluff is frowned upon for encouraging chaos, while quiet needlework gets you a gold star. If you want to play catch, it must be done with a tightly stitched regulation beanbag, preferably outdoors, and ideally under the watchful eye of a disapproving adult holding a handkerchief to their nose. In the corner, there's often a set of iron hoops for hoop rolling, a pastime that sounds innocent until you realize it involves chasing a metal ring down a corridor filled with priceless vases and siblings who believe in full-contact sport. Board games exist, but mostly involve rules longer than the Magna Carta and the constant threat of being accused of cheating, a crime on par with treason. And yet, for all its hazards, the playroom is an oasis from the relentless moralizing of the adult world. Here, you can stage grand battles between tin soldiers, or set up a tiny tea party for your long-suffering teddy bear and the doll with only one remaining limb. Sometimes, if Nanny is distracted and the coast is clear, you can invent your own games, throwing caution and the occasional building block to the wind. Of course, every playroom has its legends. The toy you're forbidden to touch, often broken, awaiting repair since 1867. The sibling who allegedly swallowed a marble and lived to tell the tale, the ghostly creak of the toy cupboard door late at night. You swap stories in whispers, trying to outdo each other with tales of near misses, dramatic rescues, and the day Cousin Bertie sat on a spinning top and walked funny for a week. When playtime ends, you tidy up, pretending you weren't just waging a miniature civil war. Fingers accounted for splinters, knees checked for bruises, and if you make it to supper without any obvious signs of trauma, you've done well. In the Victorian playroom, fun and danger go hand in hand, and if you can dodge tetanus, survive the glare of haunted dolls, and avoid losing your marbles, literally and metaphorically, you're already a step ahead in the grand game of life. In a stunning display of Victorian logic, urban parents sometimes hang their babies in wire cages outside the window for fresh air. If you're lucky, you're only slightly chilled. If not, you learn early about gravity and the pigeon population of London. The scene is almost surreal. Row upon row of soot-streaked brick, and jutting out from the upper windows, these curious little wire boxes, each containing a swaddled infant blinking suspiciously at the city. Victorian parenting books are full of dire warnings about stale air and unventilated rooms, so naturally, the solution is to suspend your precious bundle several stories above the sidewalk like a potted plant. If potted plants wore bonnets and had a tendency to scream, you, the baby, are tucked into so many layers of wool, muslin, and optimism that you resemble a particularly well-fed turnip. Nanny carries you through the parlour, past the relatives, and right to the window where you're unceremoniously inserted into the cage. The door clanks shut, and there you are, hanging above the city like a slightly confused canary. If you squint, you can just make out Mrs. Beaton's baby 2 windows down, vigorously chewing on her own mitten and glaring back in solidarity. The theory is simple: fresh air is good for children. Unfortunately, Victorian fresh air is less crisp mountain breeze and more industrial fog with a hint of manure. Still, mothers believe it builds character, rosy cheeks, and, with any luck, a lifelong resistance to respiratory disease. Sometimes the local doctor strolls by, nods approvingly at the rows of airborne infants, and makes a note to sell more cough syrup next winter. Weather is only a minor consideration. If it's raining, the cage is draped with oilcloth. If it's snowing, a hot water bottle might be thrown in for company. Summer days bring a slight advantage. At least you're less likely to freeze, but you are now at the mercy of the city's entire population of pigeons who see your cage as prime real estate. The occasional well-meaning uncle will suggest a sprig of lavender to keep away the flies. It never works. Life in the baby cage is a masterclass in resilience. You quickly learn to appreciate the simple things, like the sensation of your own nose defrosting or the excitement of a double-decker bus rumbling by. Sometimes older siblings try to drop you secret treats through the bars. A crust of bread, a half-eaten toffee, or a moral pamphlet about the dangers of drafty rooms. If you cry too loudly, the neighbours peer out, tutting and offering unsolicited advice about the correct angle for maximum health benefits. Of course, the system is not foolproof. Occasionally, a faulty latch or an especially enthusiastic breeze leads to minor mishaps. There are tales, mostly exaggerated, of babies being retrieved from hedgerows, laundry lines, or, in one infamous case, the Lord Mayor's carriage. Most of the time, however, the cage holds firm, and you are brought inside, pink-cheeked, lightly dusted with soot, and praised for your robust constitution. As you grow older, you develop a complicated relationship with fresh air. On the one hand, it's credited for every minor success in your life. Little Georgina never catches colds, thanks to her years in the window cage. On the other, you flinch at the sight of wire mesh and experience an involuntary shiver every time someone opens a window. The family photo album contains a blurry sepia picture of you, bundled and dangling, next to a caption that simply reads, "Our Little Skylark, July 1887. In the grand scheme of Victorian parenting, baby cages are both absurd and weirdly logical, born of genuine concern, filtered through a cloud of bad science and worse urban planning. And yet, if you survived your time as a human window garnish, you came out tougher, breezier, and with stories no modern baby monitor could ever rival. Fresh air, they said, builds character, builds memories, builds, if nothing else, a lifelong suspicion of window ledges. Step out of line, and you'll meet the business end of a wooden spoon or a well-practiced glare. Corporal punishment is seen as character building, and the phrase, "spare the rod, spoil the child," is embroidered on every respectable cushion. Victorian discipline is a complicated mixture of science, folklore, and creative embroidery. There are actual rules, of course, long, complicated lists of them, written out in beautiful copperplate by some humorless family patriarch and posted in the nursery, kitchen, and possibly even the chicken coop. Rules about elbows off the table, shoes lined up just so, and an almost supernatural reverence for punctuality. Break one, and you risk a warning look. Break two, and you'll soon learn how inventive the Victorians could be when it came to enforcing obedience. The arsenal of discipline is impressive. There are wooden spoons, canes, slippers, and the all-purpose hairbrush, each assigned to a particular type of offence, from minor giggling to the capital crime of talking back. Nanny can flick a duster at a range of 10 feet, and your mother's glare can be felt across 3 rooms and 1 minor time zone. Some families even keep a punishment chair, an ornate seat in the hallway reserved for those who fail to live up to the family standards. It's uncomfortable, intimidating, and positioned directly under the family portrait of the sternest-looking ancestor available. Punishments are tailored to fit the crime. For spilling milk, stand in the corner and recite the Lord's Prayer, backwards if you're particularly unlucky. For speaking out of turn, copy outlines from the Book of Virtues until your hand cramps. For running indoors, a brisk outdoor march, rain or shine, under the watchful eye of Nanny, who times you with a pocket watch that has never once been wrong. The ultimate threat, whispered between siblings and older cousins, is the infamous early bedtime, a fate only slightly preferable to exile. But the real weapon of Victorian discipline is shame. No one scolds like a Victorian adult. A single sigh from mother can shrivel your soul. A raised eyebrow from father is enough to make you reconsider your entire approach to life. Even the family dog gives you a judgmental look. Every error is discussed at length over supper, an audience participation event in which you are expected to confess, repent, and promise to never again forget to curtsy to the umbrella stand. There is also the public humiliation of the confession. If you've done something particularly shocking, perhaps tracked mud into the parlour, or, scandal of scandals, giggled during a prayer, you are required to stand before the family and explain yourself. Siblings pretend not to smirk while grandmama sighs in a way that suggests your actions are single-handedly hastening the decline of civilization. Yet, in the twisted logic of the age, all of this is supposedly for your own good. Discipline, they say, breeds virtue, fortitude, and the kind of stoic endurance required to survive a dinner party with Aunt Prudence. The wooden spoon is not an instrument of terror, but of love. A love expressed through mildly traumatic life lessons and the firm belief that you'll thank me when you're older. Spoiler alert, you won't. For every tale of the rod, there are also endless rules about rewards. Sometimes, if you've managed to keep your shoes polished, your books dusted, and your younger sibling from eating the wallpaper paste, you might receive a toffee, a new penny, or, most thrilling of all, a rare word of praise. "Well done," says father, and it echoes in your heart until at least tea time. So you learn to walk softly, keep your opinions to yourself, and develop an uncanny ability to sense a grown-up's approach. You become a master at reading the room, calculating just how far you can push your luck before the wooden spoon makes an appearance. You might even discover the secret art of negotiating lesser punishments, offering to take an extra helping of cold cabbage in exchange for skipping the lecture on the dangers of unchecked enthusiasm. In the end, Victorian discipline is less about the rod and more about the rules. Rules you memorize, break at your peril, and eventually pass down to the next generation with a sigh and a slightly softer spoon. Because history, like your mother's glare, has a long memory. If you ever receive a sweet, cherish it. You may not get another until Christmas. Sweets are rare, expensive, and come with a side of immediate toothache. Dentists, if they exist, are armed with pliers and very little sympathy. The mere mention of a treat sends a hush over the Victorian household. You might spot a tin of barley sugar on the highest shelf, or a faint scent of peppermint wafting from the parlour, signals that today the gods of glucose are smiling down. Maybe it's a birthday, or Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, or perhaps your mother is feeling unusually generous after her second sherry. Regardless, anticipation is palpable. You assemble with your siblings in the drawing room, hearts pounding, eyes wide, each hoping for a single jewel-like sweet. Victorian confections are objects of awe and mild terror. Hard candies, usually hand-wrapped and available in alarming colours, are displayed in glass jars like priceless relics. Turkish delight, if you're very upper middle class, arrives dusted with enough powdered sugar to induce sneezing fits. The local bakery offers sticky buns, treacle tarts, and, for the financially adventurous, candied violets. But the most coveted delicacy is chocolate, which in this era is not so much a bar as an experience. A gritty, waxy rectangle best described as almost edible. Acquisition of sweets is a family affair. Mother hands out barley sugar drops with the solemnity of a sacrament. Each child receives exactly one, to be savoured slowly, no biting allowed. Sucking a sweet is a delicate, contemplative process, ideally accompanied by reading Pilgrim's Progress, or listening to a cautionary tale about a boy who once ate 2 in one sitting and spontaneously combusted, or was sent to bed without supper, which is much the same. Of course, the joy is short-lived. Victorian sweets are as famous for their dental consequences as their taste. Even before you finish, you sense a familiar ache in your molars, a warning that the family dentist, who moonlights as the local barber, veterinarian, and, on weekends, a hypnotist, will soon be required. Dentistry in this era is more performance art than medical science. If you complain of a toothache, you're handed a clove and told to bite down until the pain loses interest. Persistent agony earns you a visit to Mr. Blackwell, whose toolkit consists of rusty pliers, a bottle of gin, and what can only be described as a sense of optimism. If you survive the ordeal with your sweet tooth intact, you learn the strict etiquette surrounding treats. Never eat in front of guests. Never chew noisily. Never, under any circumstances, trade sweets for marbles, frogs, or the neighbour's cat. Sharing is encouraged in theory, but in practice, each child develops a series of cunning hiding spots. Hollowed-out books, old shoe boxes, or the infamous emergency stash inside the lining of your Sunday best. For the less fortunate, treats might mean a slice of dry fruitcake, or if times are hard, a spoonful of molasses hastily scraped from the bottom of a nearly empty jar. There are rumours of children who have tasted sugar cubes outside of Christmastide, but these are usually dismissed as fairy tales or symptoms of excessive reading. The closest you come to regular sweetness is bread and jam, served on rare, sunlit afternoons, and only if no one else is watching. Every so often, the town hosts a fair, where children are unleashed upon stalls groaning with gingerbread men, sticky toffee apples, and boiled sweets in colours that defy the natural order. Here, all caution is thrown to the wind. You gorge yourself in an hour, then spend the evening regretting every decision as you clutch your stomach and contemplate the meaning of moderation. In the end, sweets are not just food, they are fleeting moments of happiness, the stuff of childhood legend, and the origin story for your lifelong distrust of anyone holding dental tools. Victorian treats may be rare, but their memory, like your dentist's bill, lingers for years. Off to school, where you'll memorize times tables, recite Latin, and practice penmanship until your fingers cramp. The classrooms are drafty, the teachers are strict, and if you fail at spelling, you'll spend lunchtime copying out moral lessons by candlelight. Victorian schooling is less an education and more an endurance sport. Your day begins with the shrill sound of a bell, possibly rung by a headmistress with a suspicious amount of enthusiasm. You trudge in through the iron gates, shoes polished, hair parted with mathematical precision, and every inch of your uniform starched into submission. The schoolroom itself is a monument to minimal comfort. Rows of splintery desks, ink pots that leak with alarming regularity, and blackboards still dusty from the last generation's suffering. You find your assigned seat. No such thing as picking your own, not unless you fancy a stern lecture on the evils of personal choice. Each desk comes equipped with a slate, a nub of chalk, and exactly 1 inch of writing space. A cold draft snakes along the floorboards, making your toes curl in their boots. In winter, you see your breath as you recite multiplication tables, and in summer, you sweat quietly, careful not to let perspiration smear your painstakingly neat script. The curriculum is broad, if not always inspiring. You are expected to know your times tables backward, recite long passages of moral verse, work while you work, play while you play, and diagram sentences until the meaning of language itself becomes questionable. Latin is taught with an air of resigned dread. After all, nothing says preparation for life like a dead language. Geography involves memorizing countries you will never visit, while history is mostly a list of kings, battles, and why the French are not to be trusted. Teachers, meanwhile, are less instructors and more referees in the daily contest between discipline and rebellion. Mr. Snipe, your mathematics teacher, possesses the uncanny ability to appear directly behind you whenever your attention wavers. Miss Grimshaw, the writing mistress, can spot a sloppy cue at 30 paces and will not hesitate to assign extra copywork. Discipline is maintained by the liberal use of the cane, the dunce cap, and the most feared of all, public humiliation in front of the class. If you excel, there is little time for celebration. Perhaps a gold star, a pat on the head, or the dubious privilege of dusting the chalkboard. If you fail, the consequences are swift and creatively soul-crushing. A single misspelling can result in half an hour of line writing. I must remember that I comes before E, except after C, unless, or worse, an impromptu recitation of moral maxims in front of the entire school. Your reputation depends entirely on your ability to remember whether receive is spelled with 2 E's or an existential crisis. Lunchtimes are no reprieve. You eat hurriedly, cold bread, a slice of cheese if you're lucky, or last night's mystery stew if you're not. There's no cafeteria, just a drafty hall and a hope that your sandwich has not been pre-squished by a passing prefect. Playtime, when allowed, consists of supervised, healthful activities such as organized marches around the playground or, if you're feeling rebellious, a forbidden game of marbles in the corner. At the end of the day, you stagger home with ink-stained fingers, aching wrists, and a head full of facts, half of which may or may not be true. Your handwriting is impeccable, your respect for authority absolute, and your dreams haunted by the multiplication table and the vengeful spirit of Latin verbs. In the grand tradition of Victorian childhood, school is not about joy, discovery, or even learning. It's about survival, discipline, and ensuring you never, ever forget to put your name at the top of the page. Cough? Here's a syrup containing alcohol, opium, and a pinch of hope. Cuts? Slap on some mercury ointment. The family medicine cabinet is a graveyard of now illegal substances, and nobody is entirely sure what any of them do. Victorian medicine is not so much a science as a magical guessing game, and every household is equipped with a cabinet that would make a modern pharmacist call the police. This is the era of a little something for what ails you, where dosing is measured in heaping spoonfuls and side effects are generally ignored unless they're interesting enough to mention at supper. The first line of defense is always a syrup. Have a cough? Mother cheerfully produces a thick, brown potion that smells like a distillery on a bad day and tastes worse. You ask what's in it. Goodness, she replies, which you recognize as code for everything left in the bottle plus a dash of hope. The label, if you can read it through the patina of syrup drips, proudly advertises alcohol, opium, chloroform, and a proprietary blend of 12 calming herbs. You are told to take 2 spoonfuls and then go lie down, which you do, and for the next 8 hours, you're either asleep, floating, or composing poetry to the wallpaper. Minor cuts and scrapes? Out comes the mercury ointment, dabbed on liberally by someone who still thinks antiseptic means it stings a lot. For bigger wounds, there's carbolic acid, followed by a layer of something called healing paste, whose chief ingredients seem to be lard and Victorian optimism. For bruises, the standard remedy is to rub them with goose fat or possibly butter, because apparently the solution to pain is to make yourself more delicious. Then there's the medicine for nerves. Children are not supposed to have nerves, of course, but if you show any signs of anxiety or a tendency to jump at thunder, you'll be dosed with misses. Winslow's soothing syrup, guaranteed to silence children, horses, and probably minor spirits. If you're too energetic, the solution is cooling powders, which claim to calm the humours but mostly induce a lengthy nap and a mild rash. Colds and fevers are treated with a dazzling array of concoctions. Hot mustard plasters are slapped onto your chest with the solemnity of a knight being anointed, and left there until you either recover or develop a new, equally mysterious rash. Garlic necklaces are tied around your throat to draw out the illness, and if that doesn't work, the family doctor is summoned. The doctor's black bag contains forceps, a stethoscope, and an alarming number of leeches, which he applies liberally, because if you're not bleeding, are you really being treated? Stomachaches receive the most creative responses. You'll be dosed with a digestive cordial, a euphemism for anise-flavoured paint stripper. Constipation? That's what castor oil is for, a punishment so legendary it's rumoured to work through sheer terror alone. Diarrhea, on the other hand, earns you a thick rice gruel and a long lecture about the dangers of unruly intestines. The family medicine chest contains wonders and horrors in equal measure. Powders that fizz, ointments that burn, lozenges that glue your tongue to your teeth, and tonics that promise to restore vitality but mostly restore your appreciation for plain water. On rare, blessed occasions, you're given a cup of hot milk and told to sleep it off. This works not because it cures anything, but because you are, at last, left alone. In the Victorian era, illness is both a drama and a group activity. Everyone gathers to offer advice, argue about favourite cures, and reminisce about that one time cousin Algernon was cured of his limp by 3 drops of turpentine and a firm talking to. Whether you recover or not is beside the point. What matters is that you've sampled half the contents of the local apothecary and survived the experience, possibly with superpowers, probably with a persistent rash. In the end, the best medicine is survival and a healthy skepticism about any bottle labelled soothing. The only thing more dangerous than your nanny is your siblings. You form shaky alliances, negotiate for closet space, and occasionally stage daring escape attempts, always foiled by the creaky stairs and your little brother's inability to keep a secret. The Victorian nursery is a war zone delicately disguised in lace. Sibling dynamics are a mixture of chess match and battle royale, complete with shifting alliances, betrayals, and the occasional truce negotiated over stale biscuits. You quickly learn that nothing is sacred, least of all your possessions. If you turn your back for a second, your favourite top is spinning in someone else's hands, your prized marble has rolled under a mysterious piece of furniture, and your secret stash of peppermints has vanished, leaving only a trail of suspiciously sticky fingerprints. Allies and enemies change with the tides, or, more accurately, with the proximity of adults. When Nanny enters, all hostilities are paused and everyone instantly becomes an innocent angel, suddenly fascinated by embroidery or the intricacies of Latin grammar. The moment she leaves, the real games begin. Whispers and elbow nudges replace polite conversation. The eldest sibling tries to assert authority with a dignity that lasts until someone remembers where they hid last week's confiscated cricket bat. Closet space is a matter of life and death. The wardrobe, technically large enough for all, somehow becomes a battleground every morning. There is a single shelf that is, for reasons no one can explain, the most coveted territory in the room. Victory is fleeting, however. One day you reign as king of the upper shelf, the next you're ousted in a coup, your nightshirt mysteriously missing, and your shoes filled with mysterious treasures, courtesy of the baby. Escapes are a favourite pastime. You and your older sister may scheme for days to sneak into the kitchen for an illicit slice of cake, or to the garden to dig for buried treasure, which usually turns out to be last season's carrots. Every plot hinges on silence, teamwork, and impeccable timing. Every plot is ruined by your little brother's inability to whisper, or his unfortunate habit of shouting now, just as Nanny rounds the corner. There's always a scapegoat, usually the youngest, who is conscripted into confessing when things go wrong. This earns them a sort of immunity, though at the price of trust from the rest of the sibling parliament. Betrayal is never far away. Maybe you told your sister your secret hiding place for sweets, and the next morning it's been ransacked and replaced with a note reading, "Better luck next time." Maybe your brother swore loyalty in the Great Curtain Fort War, only to defect the moment you were summoned to wash for dinner. Treaties are drawn up in crayon, signed with sticky hands, and broken by sundown. You learn to negotiate, to read faces, and to bribe with the currency of the day, buttons, sweets, or information about the new governess. But there are moments of unity too. Nothing brings siblings together faster than an external threat. The sudden approach of Nanny's footsteps, the looming horror of cod liver oil, or a parental summons that bodes ill for everyone. Then, as if by magic, squabbles are set aside, and you present a united front, all suspiciously silent and wide-eyed. Evenings offer the rare peace of shared bedtime stories, whispered secrets, and giggles stifled under scratchy wool blankets. You reminisce about past escapades, make grand plans for future mischief, and, in rare moments of honesty, admit you'd be terribly lonely without your fellow conspirators. Victorian siblinghood is not for the faint of heart, but it's an education in survival. You leave childhood with a finely tuned sense of strategy, a healthy distrust of anyone offering to trade, and a collection of memories that range from triumphant to traumatic. And as you finally drift off to sleep, the sounds of quiet snoring and distant plotting fill the nursery, a nightly reminder that, in the grand tradition of family, you're all in this together, whether you like it or not. Victorian parents have advice for every occasion, from don't read too much or your eyes will fall out to if you swallow a cherry pit, a tree will grow inside you. It's never comforting, usually alarming, and often based on something they overheard at a funeral. The day begins with guidance and ends with warnings. Advice is dispensed the way other families serve tea. Frequently, with great seriousness, and usually whether you asked for it or not. If you're caught standing near an open window, you'll receive a mini lecture about the perils of drafts. That's how Cousin Percival caught his chills and lost his sense of direction. If you try to leave the house with damp hair, your mother will recount the cautionary tale of a girl from Ipswich who did just that and was never the same again. She may not remember what happened to the girl, but she's confident it was unpleasant. Every minor illness is an opportunity for unsolicited wisdom. A sniffle is not just a cold, it's a warning from the universe. Your prescribed mustard plasters, eucalyptus vapors, and, if you're particularly unlucky, a dose of something described as tonic. The directions are simple. Drink until you feel restored, or at least so distracted by the taste that you forget why you needed it. Sometimes your father's advice overlaps suspiciously with home remedies. The best cure for a sore throat is a brisk walk and a good attitude, he declares, as if morale alone can defeat viral infection. But health is only the beginning. Reading, the one escape from endless chores and moral poetry, is subject to a staggering list of warnings. Don't read by candlelight, or your eyesight will fail before you reach adulthood. Don't read novels, or your mind will wander and you'll become unfit for marriage. Don't read standing up, sitting down, lying down, or at all really, unless it's the Bible. On rare occasions, you're allowed to read, but only if you promise not to get too excited by the plot. The real gems come at the dinner table, where your parents hold forth with nuggets of questionable wisdom on everything from social climbing to dietary fiber. Never trust a man with two first names. If you cross your eyes, they'll stay that way forever. Always carry a handkerchief, a shilling, and an alibi. Your mother is especially fond of botanical warnings, fruit pits, apple seeds, and the occasional grape all have the power, in her view, to create unexpected internal gardens. You check your stomach in the mirror, just in case. Victorian advice is rarely practical and never reassuring. You're told that picking at scabs will lower your standing with the local clergy, that laughing too loudly will frighten the neighbours, and that asking questions is how the French do things. If you express skepticism, you're accused of modern thinking, a condition almost as dangerous as weak ankles or left-handedness. Every so often, you're hit with advice that borders on the poetic. Remember, life is a journey. Keep your shoes clean and your conscience cleaner, or the mysterious. Trust the postman but never the post. There are warnings about muddy puddles, unaccompanied walks, and talking to anyone with a moustache after sundown. Despite the sheer volume of advice, you rarely receive practical tips like how to avoid Nanny's radar or what to do if you accidentally spill ink on your Sunday best. Instead, you become a master at the polite nod and the distracted "yes, father," while privately planning your next minor rebellion. Yet, in their own anxious way, your parents mean well. They are trying through a steady stream of folklore, superstition, and wishful thinking to prepare you for a world they only half understand. And while their advice may be confusing, alarming, or occasionally hilarious, it becomes the background music of your childhood, a constant reminder that in Victorian England, safety, virtue, and a little healthy paranoia are never in short supply. The nursery walls are coated in lead-based paint, the curtains are made of arsenic-dyed fabric, and asbestos lurks in every cosy nook. It's a wonder anyone survives to adulthood, but at least you're insulated from drafts, and sometimes consciousness. Victorian interior design is best described as lethal elegance. Everything is a potential health hazard, but at least it's tastefully coordinated. You wake up each morning to a room cheerfully painted in delicate shades of pistachio, rose, and a colour known as Victorian green, which, as it turns out, is shorthand for contains enough arsenic to stun a small horse. It's lovely in the morning sun, less so when the wallpaper starts to flake, and you find yourself wondering if that strange headache is really just from reading by candlelight. The carpet, lush and patterned, hides not just stains from last year's Christmas pudding, but a generous helping of mercury, used for the rich colours and extra softness. The curtains billow in the breeze, their deep green and blue shades courtesy of chemical dyes, with names like Paris green and Shields green, both famous for causing skin rashes and the odd fainting spell. You're warned not to chew on the drapes, but nobody warns the cat, and the resulting vet bill is filed away with acceptable childhood hazards. Your toys are no better. Dollhouse furniture is painted in glorious lead-based hues that slowly chip off onto sticky fingers. Tin soldiers and painted alphabet blocks look charming lined up on the shelf, less charming after you spend a rainy afternoon gnawing on them out of boredom and leave the playroom with a mysterious metallic aftertaste. Even the humble teething ring is made of bone, ivory, or occasionally a handy bit of whalebone dipped in whatever paint was left over from the front hall. If you happen to trip and fall, which you will, because all the rugs are designed to slip at the faintest provocation, you might find yourself brushing up against the coal scuttle, liberally dusted with powdered asbestos. This is considered the modern touch. Asbestos keeps away fire, insulates against the cold, and is handy for stuffing into cracks to keep out the miasmas. If only it kept out your aunt's stories about the glory days of the Crystal Palace. Every night, you're tucked into bed beneath a mountain of blankets stuffed with questionable materials. The mattress is a patchwork of horsehair, feathers, and a few relics from previous generations, all gently marinating in a cloud of whatever powder was fashionable that year. The pillows smell faintly of lavender and camphor, added not for your comfort, but to cover up the scent of slow chemical decay. Ventilation is provided by a window that jams shut in the summer and opens with a scream in the winter. Fresh air is considered both vital and suspicious, so your parents compromise by cracking the window just a smidge and then stuffing the gap with asbestos wadding. You fall asleep listening to the gentle rattle of the arsenic-dyed curtain cords and the distant sound of the family discussing whether yellow wallpaper is too cheerful for a child's temperament. It's not all doom and gloom. The upside of all this hazardous decor is that it builds a sort of immunity. Survive your Victorian nursery, and you'll never fear a little household dust again. Family legend has it that your uncle once licked the wallpaper and lived to tell the tale, though he's never been quite the same since. The cat, meanwhile, refuses to enter the nursery at all and instead lounges suspiciously in the corridor. Still, you can't help but feel proud as you gaze around your pastel death trap. Other children might have modern nurseries, free from lead, arsenic, and asbestos, but do they have such character-building decor? In the Victorian home, you're not just living with history. You're inhaling it, nibbling on it, and sometimes, if you're very unlucky, waking up to find it on your pillow. In the end, it's all part of growing up robust, which is Victorian for miraculously still breathing. Your parents read an article in Punch magazine, and suddenly you're eating nothing but tapioca for a week. The Victorian era loves a diet craze, especially if it involves boiled cabbage, toast water, or a medical endorsement from someone with mutton chops. No meal is safe from the winds of culinary fashion. One day breakfast is hearty porridge. The next, it's slippery elm gruel, recommended by a doctor whose only qualification is a bushy set of sideburns and a suspicious letter after his name. Lunch might be reduced to invalid jelly or the even more ominous beef tea, a dish that sounds exciting but is really just a cup of warm, meaty water and the vague taste of regret. At the heart of every Victorian fad diet is the belief that food is less about pleasure and more about fortitude. Flavor is seen as frivolous, variety is suspicious, and anything remotely tasty is accused of corrupting your moral fiber. No sooner have you grown attached to currant buns than they're denounced in the periodicals as a threat to your soul and digestive tract. The family cook, tasked with interpreting these shifting trends, spends half her time boiling vegetables and the other half explaining why dessert now tastes like soap. There's always a new superfood promising miraculous results. Arrowroot is all the rage, supposed to soothe the bowels and the temper. Bread made from patent flour appears, promising to be more digestible, if less edible. Someone's uncle is advocating pure beef extract as a cure for everything from melancholia to sore ankles. Mothers trade recipes for blancmange with the same urgency as modern parents trade gluten-free snack hacks. You suspect half of these new foods were invented by people with shares in the tapioca trade. Medical endorsements are everywhere. Dr. Quimby's digestive powders claim to turn cabbage into a delicacy and prevent intestinal uproar. If the good doctor is pictured in a velvet waistcoat with a stern expression, the odds are high you'll be served his concoction by the end of the week. Your mother reads aloud testimonials from the Times. Since eating nothing but cold stewed prunes for a fortnight, my digestion has never been more efficient. You eye the prune dish with deep suspicion. No Victorian diet is complete without a healthy dose of water-based substitutes. Toast water is a favourite. Stale bread soaked in boiling water, strained and served lukewarm. If you're lucky, you get a dab of jam to swirl around for colour. Milk is boiled into oblivion, and even tea is sometimes tempered with vinegar for the health of your inner humours. Your personal favourite is cabbage water, an aromatic beverage that seems designed solely to test the limits of filial obedience. The pursuit of purity extends to special diets for children. If you're too thin, it's suet pudding and lard sandwiches for a week. Too plump? Welcome to the raw carrot and barley regime. There is a persistent suspicion that if you enjoy your food, you're doing something wrong. Sweets and cakes are rationed like gold dust, while medicinal treats, licorice root or tonic biscuits, are handed out as if they're chocolate, but with about as much joy. Of course, the diets never last. Just as you resign yourself to a month of sago pudding, a new trend sweeps through the household, perhaps dry toast and boiled turnips, or all things pickled. Fads fade as quickly as they appear, but not before leaving their mark in the form of vivid childhood memories and the occasional nervous tick when someone mentions health bread. At the end of the day, you become an expert in politely pretending to enjoy whatever is on your plate, developing a palate that can distinguish between 17 varieties of boiled starch and the precise difference between potted meat and mystery loaf. If nothing else, Victorian diet fads teach you resilience, resourcefulness, and the fine art of hiding unwanted food in the nearest potted plant. And that, as every Victorian parent will tell you, is character building. Christmas arrives in a flurry of anxiety and pine needles. You receive a single toy, a cold orange, and stern warnings not to play too loudly. Everyone is deeply sentimental and slightly ill from last night's roast goose. Victorian Christmas is less a holiday and more an endurance event, combining equal parts cheer and rigid protocol. The season begins weeks in advance, with the family launching a full-scale assault on the drawing room, dusting, polishing, and debating whether holly or mistletoe is less likely to poison the cat. The house fills with the scent of dried oranges, cloves, and the faint panic of people realizing they forgot to order the plum pudding. The Christmas tree, a prickly marvel imported from Germany and championed by Queen Victoria herself, is erected with military precision. You and your siblings are enlisted to help, which means being told to stand still, not touch anything, and, under no circumstances, attempt to hang the glass baubles that have survived since the reign of George IV. Each ornament has a story, always recounted in excruciating detail by an elder relative. The candles are carefully clipped to the branches and then immediately supervised for the rest of the evening by the entire family and a bucket of sand. Fire hazards are an honoured tradition. On Christmas morning you rise early, shaking with excitement and cold in equal measure. The presents are simple, bordering on symbolic. Perhaps a painted wooden toy, a knitted scarf, or the long-anticipated orange, the citrus equivalent of winning the lottery. No one receives batteries, mostly because they haven't been invented, but also because even if they had, your toy would still be powered by sheer imagination and hope. Breakfast is a modest affair, the calm before the culinary storm. There's bread, maybe a scrap of cheese, and, if your mother is feeling generous, a dab of homemade jam. You're warned not to spoil your appetite, though the real challenge is finding one in the first place, after the previous night's feast. The children are corralled into a corner to play quietly with their new treasures. Those who make too much noise are sent to rehearse carols with the least musical relative in the household. The main event is the Christmas dinner, a triumph of Victorian excess and culinary ambition. The table groans under the weight of roast goose, or if fortune smiles, a rare turkey, heaps of potatoes, mincemeat pies, and the ever-mysterious boiled pudding, which is doused in brandy and set alight for dramatic effect. Older relatives clap approvingly, the children gasp, and someone inevitably tries to extinguish the flames with a lace napkin. No meal is complete without speeches, long, rambling toasts to Queen, country, and the resilience of the family. Sentimentality flows like the weak sherry. Your parents reminisce about Christmases past, each story more improbable than the last. When I was a child, we had to make do with a walnut, and the memory of a sweet grandfather insists the pudding was bigger, the weather colder, and the oranges juicier. After dinner comes the tradition of enforced merriment, parlour games with rules so complicated no one actually wins, dramatic readings of Dickens, and, for the brave, a bracing walk in the icy garden to aid digestion and encourage reflection on your many blessings. You are required to thank every adult in attendance for your gifts, regardless of whether you asked for socks, needed socks, or recognized the item as socks at all. By evening, the mood is a mixture of exhaustion, satisfaction, and mild indigestion. As the gaslights flicker and the wind rattles the window panes, you gather round to sing carols, off-key, heartfelt, and at least half a verse out of order. The adults exchange tired smiles. The children, sticky with dried fruit and sentiment, start plotting how to make the magic last just a little longer. A Victorian Christmas is a masterclass in gratitude, patience, and not setting the house on fire. As you finally collapse into bed, you clutch your orange, your one precious toy, and memories of laughter and chaos. You're reminded, once again, that the real tradition is surviving it all together, with most of your dignity and your Christmas stocking intact. Pets are for building character and resilience. You might have a dog, a canary, or a surprisingly aggressive hedgehog. More likely, your constant companions are the family lice, which nobody seems particularly worried about. In the Victorian nursery, animal companionship comes in many forms, some welcome, some less so, and most arriving without formal invitation. If you're lucky, your family owns a small, nervous terrier, who spends half its life barking at coalmen and the other half shedding on every available surface. There might be a caged canary, endlessly cheeping in the window, or, for the more adventurous, a hedgehog acquired in a fit of naturalist enthusiasm and immediately regretted when it began treating the nursery rug as a personal obstacle course. Pets are seen as useful for moral instruction. Dogs teach loyalty, canaries, patience, and hedgehogs humility, mostly. Children are tasked with feeding, cleaning, and occasionally retrieving their animals from places pets should not be, such as under the grand piano or halfway up the kitchen chimney. Responsibility is encouraged, but so is fortitude. When a hamster meets an untimely end, it is buried in the garden with a Bible verse and a brisk reminder that life is fleeting and dust returns to dust. Sentimentality is reserved for expensive ponies and the occasional goose who survives Christmas. But for every official pet, there is a horde of unofficial ones. The Victorian nursery is alive with small, industrious creatures. Spiders in the corners, a parade of ants whenever someone spills jam, and the ever-present chorus of houseflies. Bedbugs make themselves at home in your mattress. Mice hold clandestine meetings in the wainscoting, and, inevitably, the family lice set up shop in your hair, cheerfully ignored by everyone except the nanny, who has a special comb and 1,000-yard stare. Attempts to combat pests are creative, if not always effective. Sticky paper traps hang from the ceiling, wafting faintly of vinegar. Lavender sachets are hidden under pillows in a vain effort to keep away moths. The cat, in theory hired to hunt mice, spends its days sunbathing and looking offended. When all else fails, your mother recommends a brisk airing of the room and a little household courage, which is code for pretend you don't see anything moving. Sometimes, pets and pests overlap in surprising ways. Siblings might adopt a particularly clever mouse, naming it and sneaking it bits of cheese until it becomes a semi-tolerated member of the household. One memorable year, your brother tries to raise tadpoles in the water jug, leading to an awkward incident at bath time and a new family rule about amphibians in the nursery. There are animal escapades and animal emergencies. The dog chews up a priceless heirloom, the hedgehog escapes and is later discovered curled up in a drawer of underclothes. Someone's canary gets loose and perches on the Christmas tree, refusing to come down until bribed with the last currant bun. Every mishap becomes a family story, recounted at dinner and polished with each retelling until it borders on myth. Caring for living things, official or otherwise, teaches you ingenuity. You learn to construct tiny houses out of matchboxes, to dig elaborate burial plots in the garden, and to identify flea bites with the expertise of a small, itchy dermatologist. Lice are picked out methodically on bath night and, if discussed at all, are considered a fact of life and proof that everyone is equal before God and insects. Through all of this, you develop a peculiar blend of empathy, stoicism, and practicality. You mourn your lost pets with sincere, if brief, sadness, and you come to terms with the less glamorous side of animal care. When you see a modern pet store, gleaming and odorless, you marvel at a world where animals are only companions, never intruders. In the end, the creatures that fill your Victorian childhood, whether adored, tolerated, or simply survived, leave their mark. And as you drift off to sleep, the comforting sounds of a dog sighing, a canary trilling, and a mouse nibbling on a forgotten biscuit are a reminder that in the zoo of the Victorian nursery, at least you're never alone. Play is strictly supervised and always educational. Rich children get rocking horses and geography games. Poor children play with sticks and whatever small rodents they can catch. The fun is proportional to the number of layers you're wearing. In the grand social theatre of the Victorian era, even leisure is a performance. And nowhere is this clearer than in the games children play. For those in grand houses, the nursery is well stocked with elaborate toys, hand-painted rocking horses, intricate dollhouses, and geography puzzles with all the colonies coloured helpfully in pink. These toys are meant to develop the mind, which is Victorian, for remind you of the British Empire at every opportunity. You are encouraged to memorise rivers, mountains, and why Wales is technically not a country, all before you're allowed to open the toy chest. But even among the fortunate, playtime is not a wild, carefree affair. Nanny hovers at the door, ready to swoop in at the first hint of unsanctioned merriment. Outdoor games must be refined, meaning croquet if you're in the country, or a very careful game of hopscotch if you're confined to the drawing room. Shouting, running, and especially laughing too loudly are discouraged. Children with loose morals make too much noise, as the family's favourite proverb goes. For working-class children, games are improvised masterpieces. The street is your playground and the world is your toy box. You might roll a hoop down the alley, stage epic battles with nothing but a stick and a vivid imagination, or trade bottle caps for the privilege of sitting on the least splintery curb. If you can catch a mouse, you can try to race it, though mice in Victorian England are notoriously unionised and prone to work stoppages. Clothing is another dividing line. Rich children are swaddled in so many petticoats and sailor suits that any attempt to run ends in collapse. Poor children, by contrast, are given a sturdy pair of hand-me-down boots, often 2 sizes too big, and whatever shirt survived last winter. The richer you are, the more likely you are to end up tangled in lace while trying to climb a tree. The poorer you are, the more likely you are to fall out of a tree but not notice until supper time. Games of make-believe are universal, but their themes reveal your station. In wealthy homes you play afternoon tea, pouring imaginary Darjeeling for dolls with slightly haunted eyes. In working-class homes, you play shop, factory, or dodge the constable, all with a level of realism that would make Dickens proud. If you're particularly unlucky, your game is help bring in the laundry before it rains, a pastime that offers all the excitement of an unpaid internship. Some games cross the social divide. Marbles, for example, is played with equal passion in drawing rooms and back alleys, though the quality of marbles varies, glass for the rich, clay or even rolled-up bread for the poor. Skipping rope is another favourite, though wealthy children are expected to recite French verbs while skipping, while their less fortunate counterparts are free to shout rude rhymes at passing carriages. Ultimately, every game is a lesson in hierarchy. The older children boss the younger, the cleverest invent the rules, and the fastest keep their shoes the longest. Cheating is frowned upon, unless you're very good at it, or very good at not getting caught. Prizes are rare, perhaps a sweet, a penny, or the right to sleep closest to the fire. Yet, despite the rules and the rags, fun finds a way. You laugh, you compete, and you occasionally conspire against adults who fail to appreciate the glory of a well-aimed mud pie. For a few precious minutes, social class melts away, and the only thing that matters is who can jump the highest, run the fastest, or keep their marble collection hidden from the family cat. And when the games are over, and you're called inside, whether to a nursery full of toys or a room with nothing but a well-loved stick, you know you've survived another day in the greatest game of all, being a child in Victorian England. Outside, the streets are a perilous obstacle course of runaway horses, mysterious puddles and chimney sweeps. You're warned daily about bad influences and the perils of fresh air. Every Victorian child, whether they live in a grand house or a tiny attic, knows that venturing onto the street is an adventure in itself, a real-life version of Snakes and Ladders, but with more actual snakes, escaped pets, and fewer ladders, unless you count those carried by the endless stream of chimney sweeps. Before you're even out the door, your parents issue stern warnings. Don't speak to strangers. Don't pick up anything that isn't yours. And most importantly, if you see a puddle, cross the street. The reason for that last bit is never fully explained, but one accidental step in and you'll find out. The true depth of a Victorian puddle is always a surprise, and usually a disappointment. The sights and sounds are relentless. Carriages rattle by, horses snort and stamp, and market vendors holler prices that change every time you blink. Somewhere, always just out of sight, a dog is barking, a baby is wailing, and a street musician is butchering a waltz on a battered violin. You cling to your coin purse, if you're lucky enough to have one, sidestep the suspicious splatters, and keep your wits about you. After all, pickpockets are not just in Dickens. They're in training on every corner. Crossing the street is an event. Horses come first. Always assume they cannot see you, because most of them don't want to. The hansom cabs race past, their drivers yelling at everyone and everything. Milk carts and fishmongers barrel along, leaving a trail of sloshing and, on a good day, a bit of free fish. If you're not careful, you'll be splashed, jostled, or shouted at, usually all at once. By the end of a single errand, you'll have acquired enough mud on your boots to plant a garden and enough city gossip to write a serialized novel. Chimney sweeps, mostly boys your own age or younger, dart in and out of traffic, faces black with soot and eyes gleaming with the wild energy of children who climb for a living. You're told never to talk to them, but you can't help exchanging grins or secret salutes. They know all the shortcuts and secret places. If you ever lose a marble, a penny, or a younger sibling, they're the ones to ask. Sometimes, if you're feeling particularly daring, you join in a game of chase with the local urchins, weaving through barrows and barrels, dodging irate shopkeepers and, if luck holds, the family's solicitor. Bad influences, according to Victorian parents, lurk everywhere. From street performers to newsboys hawking penny dreadfuls, and especially children with no shoes. You're expected to steer clear of anyone whistling, anyone spitting, and anyone who looks like they've recently won or lost a fight. If you come home with a new accent, a torn cuff, or a suspiciously well-told story about the ghost that haunts the baker's alley, you'll be subject to an interrogation worthy of Scotland Yard. And then there's the air itself. Victorian fresh air is an acquired taste, equal parts coal, smoke, manure, and the less identifiable miasmas your mother warns about. You're made to wear a scarf against the damp and scolded if you so much as cough. Yet, for all the dangers and dirt, there's a thrill in the chaos, watching the street sweepers race against the weather, glimpsing a parade or a puppet show, or just running faster than the next child on your block. Returning home is its own adventure. You're checked for new bruises, missing buttons, and signs of moral decay. Muddy boots are left by the door, pockets are searched for contraband, and faces are washed with such vigour that you suspect half your freckles are scrubbed clean off. You may not have found fortune, but you've survived another day in the greatest obstacle course ever designed, a Victorian street. And as you fall asleep, the shouts and songs of the city linger in your dreams, daring you to brave it all again tomorrow. Your future is determined early. Boys are sent to prep school to learn Latin and cricket. Girls to finishing school to perfect the art of fainting. Both are taught that emotions are best suppressed until adulthood, or at least until tea time. In the Victorian world, education is less about learning and more about becoming a proper example of your gender. For boys, school is a battlefield, one lined with Latin declensions, algebraic misery, and the odd game of cricket played in a drizzle that would make a duck reconsider its life choices. Boys are expected to become robust, serious, and above all quietly miserable in the pursuit of academic and athletic glory. Every day is structured. Chapel, arithmetic, history, a quick fight behind the gymnasium, and handwriting practice so strict that ink blots are considered acts of high treason. A boy's lessons are wide-ranging and bewildering. You must memorize vast swaths of classical poetry, recite your times tables backwards, and learn to parse Latin sentences written by people who never once had to sharpen their own quills. Science lessons involve dissecting things you're fairly certain were alive that morning, and geography is taught with a world map where vast swathes are labelled "Here be British interests." The crown jewel of a boy's education, though, is cricket. It is played rain or shine, and no one truly knows the rules except the headmaster and maybe the gardener's dog. For girls, education is an entirely different affair, more tea party than boot camp, but with its own terrors. Finishing school is less about finishing an education and more about finishing any independent thought you may have once entertained. The curriculum includes French conversation, mostly about weather and embroidery, watercolours of forget-me-nots, and endless practice at the pianoforte, always with gloves on, so your hands remain as soft as your opinions. The real focus is on accomplishments. Can you paint a rose? Can you pour tea without sloshing it? Can you faint gracefully if someone says Paris in mixed company? You're taught to glide into a room, to speak just loudly enough to be heard by a small canary, and to express opinions only about the weather, Shakespearean heroines, or the best way to arrange lilies in a vase. Arithmetic is minimal, lest it strain the female constitution, and serious literature is filtered through the lens of moral improvement. Emotional repression is the order of the day. Boys must never cry, unless struck by a cricket ball, and then only in Latin. Girls may faint, but tears are reserved for moments of high drama or receiving substandard lace. Anger, excitement, and anything resembling ambition are to be bottled up and unleashed, if ever, in the privacy of one's diary or an especially stormy embroidery session. The differences extend to play as well. Boys may wrestle, shout, and stage elaborate games of war under the watchful eye of a master who pretends not to notice. Girls play croquet, engage in genteel walks, or organise doll parades where the only fighting is over who gets to be the duchess. If a girl is caught climbing a tree or a boy is found knitting, there will be a family conference, a stern letter to the Times, and probably a week of corrective reading. And yet, despite all this, there are secret rebellions. Boys trade novels under their desks, girls swap stories about intrepid lady explorers, and both dream of a world where education means more than memorizing rules and perfecting the art of the poker face. The lucky ones find a sympathetic governess or an eccentric uncle willing to sneak them a copy of the Pickwick Papers or a kite when no one is watching. In the end, Victorian education does succeed in one way. It prepares you to be a master of social camouflage, an expert at hiding boredom, and a connoisseur of the long, meaningful sigh. Whether you're conjugating verbs or arranging violets, you're learning what it means to be a Victorian, and how to survive until the next tea break. Teething is an ordeal for everyone. Victorian parents prescribe everything from bread crusts to brandy, and if that doesn't work, there's always the ever-popular Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, guaranteed to knock you out cold for 6 to 8 hours. In the Victorian nursery, the arrival of teeth is less a developmental milestone and more a collective trial by fire. For the afflicted baby, it's endless drool, red cheeks, and the urge to gnaw on anything that stands still long enough, including the cat, the corner of the rug, or a slightly haunted-looking rattle carved out of bone. For parents, it's a time of desperate innovation as they rotate through an arsenal of remedies in hopes of quieting the midnight wails and saving their own sanity. First up is the time-honoured bread crust, handed over with all the gravitas of a royal sceptre. The idea is simple. Toughen up the gums by letting the baby chew on yesterday's loaf, which is now roughly the consistency of fossilized wood. If you manage to extract any comfort, or even a single crumb, from this arrangement, you're already tougher than most. If not, your parents escalate to the next step, spirits. Brandy is dabbed on the gums for medicinal purposes, resulting in a generation of babies with a suspiciously robust tolerance for liquor and a tendency to nap through thunder. But nothing in the Victorian era quite matches the celebrity status of Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. This miracle in a bottle promises relief from all ills: teething, colic, fussiness, and a general tendency to cry at the injustices of life. The secret? A blend of morphine, alcohol, and a dash of pleasant herbs, creating a concoction that would probably require a prescription today and a lengthy visit from social services. Parents sing its praises. He slept through the night, and so did we, while quietly ignoring the fact that the baby's been smiling at the wallpaper for 3 days straight. If, for some reason, the syrup is unavailable, there are always teething powders, cooling draughts, or, if you're unlucky, bits of coral strung on a ribbon and tied around your neck for protection. The family medicine chest soon resembles an alchemist's laboratory, with vials and jars labelled in beautiful script but filled with substances that have probably been banned in 5 countries by now. The ordeal doesn't end at home. Visiting relatives arrive with advice both old-fashioned and ominous. Rub the gums with honey, if you want to add botulism to your problems, or let the child gnaw on a silver spoon, which is great advice if you happen to be related to a duke. If all else fails, there's always the suggestion of airing out the baby, which mostly involves putting you in a pram by an open window and hoping the breeze will do what brandy and morphine could not. Of course, teething isn't just hard on the baby. The rest of the household lives in a state of siege, tiptoeing around the nursery and keeping an ear out for the first sign of a wail. Older siblings are drafted as entertainment, producing puppet shows and desperate attempts at slapstick comedy, none of which are appreciated by the baby, who only wants to chew on the hem of their pinafore. When it's all over and the teeth finally emerge, there is a brief, collective celebration. Parents breathe a sigh of relief, nannies pour themselves a congratulatory sherry, and the baby, now equipped with a new set of weapons, turns their attention to biting everyone in reach. Another Victorian rite of passage, survived by grit, invention, and a frankly astonishing disregard for dosage instructions. Looking back, you realise that teething in the Victorian age wasn't just about growing teeth. It was about building the kind of resilience you'd need for a lifetime of lead paint, arsenic-dyed curtains, and breakfasts consisting entirely of gruel. If you could make it through your first year without accidentally numbing your tongue permanently, you were clearly destined for great things. Or at the very least, for a very strong cup of tea. Occasionally, you're marched into the countryside for healthful exercise, bundled in 5 layers and forbidden from touching anything interesting. Nature is considered educational, but only if you observe it from a safe, non-muddy distance. A Victorian nature walk is not so much an adventure as it is a moving lesson in caution. The adults, armed with walking sticks, baskets, and enough anxiety to fuel a steam engine, herd you and your siblings out the front door, hats firmly secured and gloves buttoned up to your elbows. Any protest about the weather is met with the time-honoured refrain: there is no such thing as bad weather, only weak constitutions. You might have hoped for a carefree romp through fields and woods, but instead you're paraded down the lane like a slightly dishevelled, woolen-clad duckling. As you trudge along, Nanny keeps a sharp eye out for danger, puddles, low branches, and, worst of all, stray dogs. Your natural urge to leap into a hedgerow is met with a withering look and a lecture on the many ailments that can be contracted from a careless brush with wild vegetation. You are allowed to admire the flowers, but only from a distance, and only after reciting their Latin names. Attempting to pick so much as a buttercup will get your gloves inspected and your moral fibre questioned. The approved activities include pointing at clouds, politely noting the shapes of various leaves, and asking questions that can be answered with a disapproving that's not suitable for children. Birdsong is to be admired, but never imitated. Climbing trees is right out, so is running, shouting, or anything that might attract the attention of a passing vicar. Your greatest hope is to be allowed to sketch a daffodil or collect a perfectly clean stone, both of which will later be confiscated, dusted, and possibly boiled, just to be safe. Despite these restrictions, there is a quiet magic to Victorian outdoor adventures. The countryside unfolds in a patchwork of meadows, hedgerows, and mysterious woodlands. The air is tinged with the scent of new grass and distant cows. Even the ever-present threat of drizzle can't dampen your curiosity entirely. Every so often, you glimpse something thrilling, a flash of a rabbit's tail, a cluster of wild berries, or a distant fox making a break for it before anyone can recite a moral lesson about cunning. Every outing is an opportunity for educational improvement. You may be required to recite poetry about nature, Ode to a Skylark is a favourite, or to sketch an acorn with feeling and accuracy. You're quizzed on everything from cloud types to the correct way to address a gardener. If you show the slightest bit of enthusiasm, a grown-up will remind you that true appreciation for nature is quiet and contemplative, meaning, please stop looking like you're enjoying yourself. If you're very lucky, you might be granted the rare privilege of wading in a shallow brook, but only after a lengthy risk assessment and the application of so many layers that falling in would just mean floating until someone fished you out with an umbrella. You return home muddy only in your dreams. The real dirt removed by vigorous brushing and the stern use of a boot scraper. Of course, some children find ways to rebel. A quick dash behind a hedge, a secret handful of snails, or a forbidden game of who can jump the furthest when the adults' backs are turned. These are the stuff of Victorian legend. You learn to treasure every stolen moment of wildness, every dandelion puff snatched on the sly, every grass stain you can successfully hide until laundry day. In the end, the Victorian nature walk is a paradox. You're out in the world, yet held firmly in check by etiquette and wool. But even through the layers, you catch a glimpse of the wildness that lives just beyond the lane, a reminder that, sometimes, childhood is less about following rules and more about finding adventure in spite of them. The Victorians love a good haunting. You grow up terrified of everything from jack-o'-lanterns to miasmas. Every unexplained cough is blamed on a nearby ghost, and you're expected to keep your soul tidy at all times. The nursery is filled with whispers and shadows. Every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of candlelight, is an opportunity for someone, usually an older sibling or a particularly mischievous uncle, to declare that the house is haunted. You're told never to whistle indoors, it summons spirits. To cross yourself before passing a mirror at night, that's where ghosts get in. And to avoid opening windows after dark, lest the miasmas or something even worse drift in. If you sneeze 3 times in a row, someone is guaranteed to make the sign of the cross and push a piece of bread into your hand, just in case. Superstition is woven into every part of Victorian childhood. If you drop a fork at the dinner table, it means a visitor is coming, possibly a ghost, definitely someone with muddy boots. Spilling salt is a near-apocalyptic event. You must immediately toss a pinch over your left shoulder to blind the devil. Don't ever step over a broom, or you'll never get married. If a black cat crosses your path, you're supposed to turn around, go home, and reconsider every life choice you've made so far. Bedtime is when things get truly spooky. The tales begin. Stories of haunted attics, wandering souls, and vengeful spirits who dislike children who giggle after sundown. You lie awake, heart pounding, watching the shadows stretch across the wallpaper, arsenic green of course, convinced that every chilly draught is the breath of something otherworldly. Thunderstorms become gothic dramas. The howling wind is surely the wail of the restless dead, and if the clock strikes 13, well, best not to speak of that at all. Guilt and fear are partners in the Victorian mind. Every misdeed, whether it's stealing a jam tart or leaving muddy footprints on the stair runner, is certain to attract supernatural consequences. Ghosts, you're assured, prefer to haunt the naughty, the lazy, and the disrespectful. You become a master of apology and confession, just in case a spirit is lurking, taking notes for some infernal accounting. Holidays are especially rich with supernatural anxieties. At Halloween, jack-o'-lanterns are carved not for fun, but to scare away the spirits that are said to walk the earth on All Hallows' Eve. On Christmas Eve, you gather for ghost stories by candlelight, shivering not just from cold, but from the thought that Great Uncle Frederick might actually appear in the doorway, eager for a second helping of pudding. Even daily chores are governed by a web of omens. You must stir the Christmas pudding clockwise for luck. Never rock an empty cradle. It invites tragedy. Finding a spider in your shoe is either good luck or a sign you need new shoes, depending on which aunt you ask. And if you ever dream of teeth falling out, don't mention it before breakfast, or the whole family will be in black by spring. Yet, amid the dread, there's a peculiar comfort in superstition. It offers a kind of logic for the unexplainable, a way to make sense of drafty rooms, mysterious rashes, and why the nursery always feels colder after sunset. You whisper protective charms, avoid ladders, and keep your eyes peeled for omens, hoping to navigate childhood without drawing the attention of the spectral bureaucracy. In the end, you grow up with a sixth sense for things that go bump in the night. Every shadow is a story. Every unexplained itch, a warning from beyond. Victorian superstitions may fill you with dread, but they also fill your childhood with drama, ritual, and a lifelong respect for salt shakers. So, you tuck yourself in, say your prayers, and remind yourself, as long as your soul is tidy and your bread is handy, you just might make it through the night, ghosts and all. Puberty arrives with no warning and absolutely no explanation. Victorian parents handle this by ignoring it completely, leaving you to figure out the horrors of adolescence with only a medical encyclopedia and your older cousin's terrifying stories. One day, you're playing marbles in the nursery, and the next, you're sent upstairs to rest for what seems like a year and a half. Your body begins to betray you in every way imaginable. You grow in places that aren't supposed to grow, squeak when you mean to speak, and develop a sudden, mortifying awareness of elbows. Spots appear overnight, hair does unpredictable things, and you are suddenly, for no reason at all, taller than your mother and more awkward than a calf on ice. The official Victorian response is to say nothing at all. The word puberty is never uttered. If you ask your parents what's happening to you, they direct you to the family library, where the medical encyclopedia offers helpful, vaguely alarming illustrations and advice such as cultivate fortitude, avoid excessive reading, and take cold baths daily. The book's chapter on the change is 3 pages long, 2 of which are dedicated to listing symptoms that may or may not include unusual dreams, secret thoughts, and fits of giggling. Practical advice is doled out in cryptic warnings. Sit up straight. You're getting a stoop, your father mutters. Don't eat too much cheese at supper or you'll get ideas, says your mother, with the air of one imparting ancient wisdom. No one explains what kind of ideas. If you complain of new aches, you're given a tonic with a name like Dr. Fortitude's invigorating solution, which tastes like nail polish remover and is probably 40% gin. Girls receive a particularly bewildering crash course in Victorian modesty. The day you receive your first packet of mysterious blue ribbons, you know something is up. If you ask your mother, she simply blushes and recommends extra prayers. The household's womenfolk become tight-lipped and mysterious, offering advice like never sit on cold steps and don't run after tea. If you faint in public, everyone nods knowingly and changes the subject. For boys, the transition to manhood is equally mysterious and considerably more itchy. Suddenly, you're expected to spend hours at cricket, recite poetry with newfound gravity, and stop climbing trees, even though you secretly want to more than ever. Older cousins corner you with alarming tales of what to expect, most of which involve sudden whiskers, wrestling matches behind the stables, and the need to carry a handkerchief at all times for emergencies. Your skin rebels, your voice mutinies. You become aware of other people, girls, boys, the baker's apprentice, sometimes all at once, sometimes with the mortifying intensity of a 3-volume romance novel. Courtship, according to the family manual, is best conducted at a distance, preferably by letter, and ideally in the company of at least 4 chaperones and a dog. Your first crush is an agonizing secret, revealed only to your diary and possibly the family dog. The biggest challenge of all is dealing with emotion. Victorian children are trained to suppress feelings, but adolescence is a riot of new sensations, rage, joy, embarrassment, existential dread, all surging through you at once. You're expected to weather these storms with decorum, composure, and the occasional brisk walk. You cope in classic Victorian fashion, bottle everything up, write a brooding sonnet, and sigh dramatically at regular intervals. Eventually, you emerge from the ordeal battered but wiser, with a new appreciation for quiet corners and the ability to fake a calm exterior while panicking inside. You look back at your Victorian adolescence as a time of mystery, confusion, and surprisingly strong tea. By the time you finally join the adult table, you understand why everyone pretends not to notice what's going on with the teenagers. Some things, in the grand tradition of the era, are simply better left unsaid. Bedtime means a brisk prayer, a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride, and maybe a spoonful of sedative sleeping draught. The house creaks. The gas lamps hiss, and you drift off, grateful to have survived another day, at least until the next mysterious rash appears. The evening routine in a Victorian household is a ceremony of winding down, but not exactly winding down as we know it today. There is no gentle lull of white noise, no stories of benevolent bears in enchanted forests. Instead, you kneel at your iron-framed bed for a rapid-fire prayer, swift enough to avoid chilblains, solemn enough to keep away whatever ghosts might be listening from the wardrobe. The nursery is chilly, the fire has long gone out, and your nightshirt is 2 sizes too large, handed down from a cousin who, legend has it, once survived a bout of mumps simply by wearing enough flannel. After prayer comes the bedtime story, but story is a generous term. Most nights, it's a morality tale delivered in a whisper by Nanny or an elder sibling, cautionary fables of pride, greed, or the terrible fate of children who talk back at the table. The message is always the same. Virtue is rewarded. Naughtiness is swiftly and often hilariously punished. You're told the story of the boy who ran indoors and was struck by lightning, or the girl who forgot her manners and was promptly carried off by a stork. No pressure. If your parents are feeling particularly modern, they might offer a book, usually Pilgrim's Progress or some slightly less terrifying volume from the family shelf of improving literature. You clutch your book under scratchy blankets and try not to think about the wallpaper peeling in the moonlight or the odd whiff of camphor drifting from the medicine chest. The house makes noises, floorboards creak, wind rattles the window, and somewhere, someone coughs in a way that suggests they've just seen a ghost or, at the very least, the family cat. For the restless, or especially unlucky, there is the sleeping draught. Victorian pharmacology is, let's say, enthusiastic. A spoonful of syrup promising soothing sleep and containing an amount of opium that would put a grown bear out for a week. If you protest, you're reminded that your Aunt Belinda took it nightly and lived to the impressive age of 34. The draught tastes faintly of licorice, nightmares, and regret. You're soon drifting in and out of consciousness, grateful at least to be spared the full brunt of the house's nocturnal symphony. Bedtime is not all terror. There are small comforts: the soft thump of a sibling's foot from the next bed, the distant clatter of a late-night carriage, and the warm, conspiratorial feeling of having survived another day together. You whisper secret plans for tomorrow, promises of daring escapes and extra marmalade, before Nanny's warning shush brings peace once more. You lie awake for a while, watching shadows move across the ceiling, wondering what the next day will bring, a new rash perhaps, or a strange spot that will require 3 kinds of ointment and a stern lecture on the dangers of draughts. You are not alone. The nursery is full of small sounds: the rustle of a mouse, the sigh of the wind, the gentle rhythmic snore of the family dog curled by the fireless grate. Even the house seems to settle, as if sighing in relief that everyone, for now, is safely in bed. Eventually, sleep arrives, not gentle but total, brought on by exhaustion, storybook warnings, and just the right amount of tranquilizer. You dream of strange adventures, haunted nurseries, and endless bowls of gruel. If you're lucky, you wake in the morning, a little stiff, a little itchy, but fully prepared to face another day in the wild, weird, and wonderful world of Victorian childhood. And as you blink away sleep, you remember, surviving bedtime is its own kind of victory. Potty training in the Victorian era is less about stickers and positive reinforcement, more about public embarrassment and endless porcelain paraphernalia. Your personal chamber pot is decorated with whimsical scenes of flowers, or, if you're unlucky, moral warnings. There's no flushing, only a brisk trip to the backyard night soil man, whose job description includes the phrase hazard pay. You learn quickly: accidents mean lectures, and missing the pot is an offence best kept secret until the next housemaid's day off. For a Victorian child, the chamber pot is both an ever-present necessity and an object lesson in humility. It lurks beneath the bed, or in a special nook behind the nursery screen, never far from reach, and always in danger of being discovered by an adult at the worst possible moment. Some are painted with gentle encouragement. Roses, cherubs, perhaps a jolly goose, but others bear stern warnings. Cleanliness is next to godliness, or look before you leap. The message is clear. This is a moral enterprise, not a biological one. Your first lessons in bathroom etiquette begin early. Nanny or mother delivers a speech about proper comportment, which involves phrases like timely evacuation and don't make a spectacle of yourself. You're taught to ask politely, to avoid rushing, and above all, to never, ever discuss your business at the breakfast table. If you do, expect a chorus of scandalized gasps and a punishment involving a lengthy session on the reflection chair. The act itself is fraught with peril. The chamber pot is not large, not steady, and prone to unexpected movement at the critical moment. The stakes are high. A successful attempt brings a nod of approval. A misfire is an event, requiring swift cover-up, and ideally blame assigned to a sibling or the family dog. Housemaids mutter darkly as they empty the contents each morning, while the night soil man arrives weakly, his cart rattling through the alley, a living reminder of what happens when Victorian plumbing stops at the kitchen sink. Potty training is public knowledge in a way modern children can only imagine. Older siblings delight in sharing horror stories of their own early failures, or worse, inventing entirely new tales for your edification. Remember when Cousin Edmund missed the pot? Had to eat cold cabbage for a week, and apologized to the entire household, including the cat. These stories are designed to haunt your dreams and keep you vigilant at all costs. Accidents are inevitable and treated as cautionary tales. There are no cheerful try-again stickers, just the brisk efficiency of Victorian discipline, a change of linen, a warning look, and a muttered reference to slippery slopes and moral decay. Your mistakes are dissected at length, quietly but thoroughly, until you resolve to never let it happen again, even if it means holding out through an entire night of howling wind and creaking floorboards. In the event of a true catastrophe, a tipped pot, a late-night mishap, or heaven forbid, a mistaken chamber in the dark, the repercussions are immediate. Sheets are stripped, windows flung open, and vinegar splashed liberally. Nanny offers a running commentary on the importance of discipline and bladder control. You resolve to avoid liquids after supper and start plotting the optimal escape routes to the pot, should the need arise at midnight. For many, the greatest dread is the eventual transition to the outdoor privy. This is a journey undertaken in all weathers, armed with a lantern, an oversized shawl, and a level of determination normally reserved for polar explorers. The privy is cold, draughty, and filled with mysteries, spiders, echoing drips, and a smell that could strip wallpaper. You are told this is character building. It's certainly memorable. Despite all this, you adapt. You learn the delicate art of balance, the value of discretion, and the importance of a quick getaway. The chamber pot becomes a fact of life, a symbol of Victorian ingenuity, resilience, and the era's unshakable belief that moral virtue could be encouraged, if not outright enforced, one uncomfortable trip at a time. And so, you survive Victorian potty training with a sense of caution, humility, and a healthy respect for porcelain. In a world without plumbing, you do what you must, and, with luck, you avoid cabbage-based punishments for another day. Getting dressed in Victorian times is a full-contact sport. Whether you're 5 or 15, the number of buttons, buckles, and shoelaces per outfit rivals a modern tax form in complexity. Young girls wrestle with mini corsets. Boys get strangled by starched collars, and everyone is expected to wear at least 3 layers, regardless of the weather. Nothing says childhood freedom like sweating through a wool waistcoat in July while your mother fusses over your shoelaces being improperly symmetrical. Your day begins not with a gentle stretch, but with the unmistakable bellow of Nanny throwing open the curtains and announcing that idleness breeds both wrinkles and ruin. Before you can protest, the daily battle with clothing commences. Each item is stacked in a formidable tower at the end of your bed: petticoats, chemises, drawers, stockings, garters, undershirts, and if you're especially unfortunate, a sailor suit requiring at least 3 adults and a passing knowledge of advanced knots. For girls, the first obstacle is always the corset, or, as it's known in the family, the embrace of discipline. A child's corset is meant to encourage perfect posture and, presumably, an early sense of despair. Nanny wields the laces with the skill of a competitive sailor, pulling until you feel taller, thinner, and significantly less able to breathe. If you complain, you're reminded that Queen Victoria herself wore tighter stays, and look how well she turned out. Boys, meanwhile, must contend with the collar, starched, upright, and apparently inspired by medieval torture devices. Each morning, your mother stands you before the mirror, tugs the collar to your chin, and surveys her handiwork like a sculptor preparing marble for public display. Any attempt to loosen it is met with a sharp glance and the reminder that a droopy collar is the first step on the road to moral collapse. You practice proper posture by balancing a book on your head, while Nanny inspects your cuffs for rogue folding and signs of frivolous living. Layering is not just a suggestion, it's a sacred ritual. Summer or winter, indoors or out, you are swaddled in wool, flannel, and occasionally velvet, because children are delicate and must be insulated at all times. This is a curious belief when, by midday, you are slick with sweat and quietly praying for a strong breeze or a fainting spell. You are warned never to remove a layer, lest you catch a chill and bring shame upon the household. Dressing is so exhausting it nearly qualifies as morning exercise. Socks sag, garters snap, and buttons have a Houdini-like ability to vanish at the slightest provocation. Ribbons tangle, sashes slip, and the family dog, ostensibly helping, steals your best glove and buries it in the garden. By the time you're finally dressed, you are more trussed than dressed, unsure whether you should go outside or simply collapse back into bed for a well-deserved rest. Accidents are inevitable. Someone will catch their sash on a door handle or rip a petticoat while attempting the dangerous art of sitting down. A popped button is both a minor tragedy and a public event, resulting in an impromptu mending session that doubles as a lesson in humility. Mothers see every loose thread and treat each wardrobe malfunction as an opportunity for moral improvement. A stitch in time saves embarrassment at tea. Special occasions, of course, bring added perils. Lace collars with microscopic hooks, hats pinned to your scalp with an optimism bordering on cruelty, and shoes so tight they might as well have been made for a different species. You sit for the family portrait in an agony of pinches and itches, practicing the kind of fixed, panicked smile that future historians will mistake for Victorian seriousness. Yet, through the sweat, the pinches, and the endless scolding, you develop agility, patience, and a deep appreciation for moments spent barefoot and unsupervised. By nightfall, you peel off your layers with relief, marvel at your continued survival, and drift off to sleep, your dreams haunted by the faint rustle of petticoats and the click of mother's mending scissors, always ready for tomorrow's wardrobe war. Getting dressed in Victorian times is a full-contact sport. Whether you're 5 or 15, the number of buttons, buckles, and shoelaces per outfit rivals a modern tax form in complexity. Young girls wrestle with mini corsets. Boys get strangled by starched collars, and everyone is expected to wear at least 3 layers, regardless of the weather. Nothing says childhood freedom like sweating through a wool waistcoat in July while your mother fusses over your shoelaces being improperly symmetrical. Morning begins not with a yawn but with a battle cry. Nanny throws open the curtains, the cold rushes in, and you're reminded there is no such thing as 5 more minutes in the Victorian household. Your clothing is neatly stacked in a complicated, intimidating pile: petticoats, drawers, undershirts, stockings, garters, chemises, waistcoats, shirts, and, if you're particularly unlucky, a sailor suit with a neckerchief that has only ever been tied properly once by a great aunt now lost to history. For girls, the day's first obstacle is the corset. Yes, even for children. The stays are meant to train your posture and your soul. laced up by Nanny with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for securing livestock. The feeling is less supportive and more rib-crushing, designed to give you a ladylike silhouette and, incidentally, ensure you never take a deep breath again until adulthood. Movement is restricted to gliding, shuffling, or the very occasional well-choreographed collapse onto a fainting couch. Boys, meanwhile, contend with starched collars so stiff they could be used as emergency splints, and shoes that take 2 adults, a boot jack, and a prayer to remove. Your morning is spent practicing proper posture by balancing books on your head while Nanny inspects your cuffs for frivolous folding. If you think yourself clever by loosening a button, beware. Mothers possess supernatural abilities to detect and correct even the faintest asymmetry at 20 paces. Layering is not just encouraged, it's mandatory. Summer, winter, indoors or out, your fate is sealed beneath a cocoon of wool, flannel, and, for the daring, velvet. The logic, as explained by adults, is that children are naturally fragile and must be insulated at all times. This is a curious stance in July, when you're slick with sweat, scratching at woolen seams, and quietly calculating the odds of fainting before breakfast. The act of dressing is so exhausting it qualifies as morning exercise. Socks sag, garters snap, and buttons seem designed to leap from their holes at the least opportune moment. Ribbons tangle, laces knot, and the family dog, supposedly helping, runs off with your second-best glove. By the time you're fully dressed, you're not sure whether to go outside or simply lie down and recover. Accidents, of course, are inevitable. Someone will trip over a too long hem or get a sleeve stuck in a door. If you rip your petticoat or lose a button before lunch, there's a very public mending session with Mother, who treats every wardrobe malfunction as both a teachable moment and a minor tragedy. Those of a rebellious nature dream of garment reduction, quietly plotting to accidentally leave a layer or 2 behind on laundry day. Special occasions bring even greater challenges. Lace collars with microscopic hooks, cravats folded according to the laws of Euclidean geometry, and hats pinned to your scalp with a force usually reserved for scientific experiments. Woe betide the child whose bonnet is crooked, whose sash is askew, or whose boots are muddied by honest play. Despite all this, you survive, developing agility, stamina, and the ability to sit very, very still. You learn to appreciate the simple things, a loosened ribbon, a moment without shoes, or the sweet rebellion of untucked shirt tails. You come to understand why adults drink so much tea, and why family portraits always look faintly panicked. In the end, Victorian childhood attire is as much about discipline as it is about decency. You're wrapped in tradition, practicality, and just a touch of paranoia, armoured against the world, the weather, and the vague threat of falling into bad habits. By the time you finally peel off your last layer at night, you've earned your sleep, your stripes, and perhaps, if you're lucky, a single night with buttons left blissfully undone. So as you drift off tonight, tucked into your clean, quiet bed, with central heating and a mattress that doesn't bite back, spare a gentle thought for the children of the Victorian era and the parents, who were honestly just doing their best with a handbook written by superstition, questionable science, and pure, unfiltered anxiety. You've survived the nursery gruel, the nursery rules, and more household toxins than the periodic table. You braved lead paint, teething syrups that could tranquilize a pony, and family portraits so grim they'd scare away nightmares. And if you made it to adulthood, you did it with at least 3 moral lessons, a collection of rashes, and a deep suspicion of all things cabbage. Let's be honest, Victorian parenting might have been well-intentioned, but it was also bizarre, bonkers, and occasionally borderline criminal. Yet somehow, through all the discipline, dubious medicine, and layers of woolen underwear, families managed to stick together. Children grew up tough, creative, and equipped with survival instincts that would put a modern prepper to shame. Tonight, as you listen to the soft hum of your fan, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your own ancestors who survived calomel, cod liver oil, and a childhood where fresh air sometimes meant dangling in a wire cage above the street. History can be brutal and ridiculous, but it's also proof that people are stubborn, hopeful, and always inventing new ways to get through the day. So relax, breathe easy, and let go of whatever small, modern worries you carried to bed. Because right now, there's no laudanum in the medicine cabinet, no arsenic in the curtains, and nobody's insisting you finish your liver pudding. Just the comfort of the present, the luxury of safety, and the quietly heroic absurdity of those who came before. Sleep well, and may your dreams be free of nannies with mustaches and lead-based wallpaper. Good night.